Hello everybody, it's Carolyn Graham here from Two Borders Real Estate. And today I just wanted to touch base with you a little bit about how we have started investing in the US and why we're investing in the US. And as I mentioned in my first video, we are investors in both Canada and the US, like doing business in both countries. But today I just want to touch a little bit about why the US and what we're planning on doing there. So we have a child that lives in the US, not too far across the Canadian border. She's a practicing physician there. And so in normal conditions, prior to COVID and post-COVID, we would be wanting to see her on a regular basis and drive across. And in visiting her when she was a student in the US, we were quite attracted to some of the real estate properties that we saw there, and found that the prices were certainly, while they were rising up, they certainly weren't going to the levels that we were seeing in Canada, and in particular in Ontario, in terms of some of the housing prices just going through the roof. So we felt that we could still get some value for property down there, make good income on rental properties, and move to build our portfolio. And also with our child living there, we wanted to invest in real estate so that she had somewhere to live, and also that we could be building business around that area as well. So during the pandemic, we decided that we would look for a multifamily home in the US, and right now we're focusing on the Michigan area. And so everything over the last year has been, of course, sight unseen, because there was no way for us to enter into the US to actually see properties. We had made connections a couple of years ago with a real estate agent in Michigan who helped our daughter find a rental unit at the time that she was still a student. So we connected with this real estate agent. It was great to have that ongoing relationship, and said that we were looking to get into a multifamily property where our daughter could live and be one of the tenants in our building. So it started out, we were doing lots of browsing to see what we liked. We knew different areas that we felt would be good for her. She needed to be close to the hospital, needed to be in an environment where she felt safe, where she had parking, where she could have a pet, things like that. So we started looking, and our real estate agent was showing us lots of different properties. But again, we had no ability to go and see them. So we really had to go on what she was seeing, what she was saying, and keep narrowing down the focus. And of course, while we're doing this, we also want to make sure that the costs are going to, or the income from the property is going to cover any costs. So that was the other piece that we had to think about. What's the rental market like there? What kind of rents does the market bear? What amenities do we have to have in place for renters? And again, during COVID, these things were challenging because it's hard to get people out to do things. Different trades weren't working. Supplies were hard to get. People, even for inspections and things like that, it was really tricky business to try to arrange all of that. Everybody was working from home, including lenders, and so it made things that much more challenging. So after going through several different places where we did put in offers, but then after having inspections done, we kind of pulled away from that. We did land on a multifamily unit in an area in Michigan that's not too far from where our daughter works. And then it was the process of aligning up, again, appraisals, inspections, and the whole lending phase. So that was where more of the fun and games and the tricky part really started. Once we landed on the house, it was, we were quite happy with that purchase. The vendor was very eager to dispose of the property. They had put a little bit of money into it to freshen things up, and they were looking to unload. The challenge for us was, again, we had to have the house appraised. We had to have the house inspected. And during that inspection time, we found out that there were some issues that needed to be resolved, and that was going to delay some of the closing, or potentially delay the closing, as some of those things had to be fixed up. But again, during COVID, not everybody's working. Some real time factors and crunches that really influenced and impacted what we were doing. So one of the first things that we did have to do is to get a pre-approval for funding. And that may sound really, really simple. And if you're a Canadian citizen and you're dealing with banks in Canada and you have, established credit and, you're working or whatever, it should be relatively standard on how you can get a typical mortgage here. There are a couple of lenders in the US that will lend to Canadian citizens, and that's RBC and Bank of Montreal. They have branches that extend into the US, and you would think that that's a very, very easy, simple process. Oh, I deal with RBC, I'm gonna deal with RBC in the States, or deal with Bank of Montreal, I'm gonna deal with them there. Totally separate entities, 100% don't mix. Now, one of those banks does do a little bit, I would say, of a better job in terms of looking at your Canadian credit score to help you in pre-qualifying for funding, but that's about as far as it goes. Everything else is like you're starting from scratch all over again, and even the terminology is different, and that was a huge factor. I'm going to talk about the lending piece in part 2 of this video, because that really was a piece that took a lot of time. There were a lot of complications with it, and not because of anything to do with our credit score, just around the demands of what the US system was looking for compared to the Canadian system, and how the two systems don't talk together. So I will do that in part 2, talk about that, because that certainly is a big issue for Canadians who are looking to invest in the US, is where do you get your funding? And I'll also speak to whether we would do that same scenario again, or whether we would do things differently going forward. But one of the biggest things that we found is that the house that we have, the multifamily that we've purchased, is in an area that's very, very old. A lot of the homes are over 100 years old, and they have lots of issues in their plumbing with roots going into the different plumbing systems. So when there was a scope put down, because you have to have a inspector come out to look at what is wrong potentially with the house, what's great with the house, before you actually can get your funding in place, it was determined that there was a significant need of root repair damage that had to be done. And again, with COVID, that ended up taking quite a few weeks before the contractor could come out, because during this time, there was still also snow on the ground, so they couldn't get into the root system to deal with that. That also was pushing back some of the closing dates, which again in the US is a little bit different than here. They have very, very short turnarounds for just about everything. So the typical closing down there is 30 to 60 days, 60 being a really long time, typically 45. So it's not like here where maybe you're buying a property in February and then you're going to take possession in September or October. Not at all. You're buying a property and you're going to own that property within a month or a month and a half, and you're going to be inside of that property. So the timelines are really short. You have to do your due diligence very, very quickly in a timely manner, and you need to have people lined up that are going to be able to help you. But again, with COVID, that made things just that much more complicated. So we had the home inspection done. There were this major thing that had to be done by the vendor. They had to repair this root system, and that just complicated. It took a little bit of time to get all of that done. And again, we were going on what the real estate broker was telling us. She was working overtime, having to go to the house all of the time to look at the work repairs for us, sending us videos so that we could see what was happening. And again, we're just going on her good faith that this is going to be a good place for us, for a rental property, for our daughter to move in. I think it would have been a little bit different if it was a rental property that we were going to rent out to tenants. We maybe wouldn't have chosen that area. It might have been in a different area. Also, maybe, we could have worked around timelines a little bit different, but because our daughter was moving there, we had to get things kind of moved up very, very quickly. So there are some challenges when you're moving across border. That was just a very tip of the iceberg, and I'm going to get into two different things in terms of next steps, the funding, what you needed to do to get that appraisal, because then if the appraisal doesn't come back and it's less than what you paid for your property, that's a problem, because the bank, of course, will only fund for the amount that you that they see it's valued at. Just making sure that the city has signed off on all of their notifications, whether they give you a permit for occupancy. Those are things that are really kind of unique to the US and in particular to the area that we purchased in. So join me next time as I get into part 2 and talk about the lending aspect, and then how we had to pull everything together very quickly to get this deal done, and some of the people that we really need to do help us at the Canadian end to get this finalized in the US. So we'll talk to you soon. Please reach out if you have any questions or comments. Please press subscribe or like if you'd like to see more of these videos, and look forward to chatting with you again soon. Take care.